Here we will be looking at human impact on biodiversity and the natural environment. What is it that the humans are doing that's actually having an impact, mostly a negative impact, on the natural environment and the biodiversity? Biodiversity is the number of different species of organisms that are present in an environment. Okay, so we could have 10 different species. It doesn't mean we have 10 organisms, because within each species there could be thousands of organisms. So if I have 10 different species, let's say in each species there's 1,000 organisms, then it means in total I should be having 10,000 organisms in that particular environment or in that habitat. Okay, we can scale up and talk about biodiversity of organisms on Earth. It means that now we are looking at all the living species that are present on the planet Earth. So there are actions that can lead to a loss of biodiversity. So if we have a loss of biodiversity, it means some species are totally wiped out or totally dying. Not just some organisms, but a whole species. It means that we are now talking of extinction. It means some species are totally being extinct. Then we'll have a reduction. If you started with 10 species and one species gets extinct, then I'll be left with 9. Diversity is just like having many varieties. The moment I drop from 10 to 9, it means varieties have reduced from 10 to 9. 10 will be more varied than 9. That's how biodiversity is being lost. So what is it that humans do that threaten the biodiversity and the natural environment? Some of the threats are this. One here, habitat destruction. Habitat is the environment in which an organism lives. So as far as we carry on with our normal human activities of, say, building and developing, we are destroying the homes of many organisms. For example, the urban areas or even the rural areas where we live in, as long as we have human constructions there, it means it wasn't there at the beginning of time. Surely those areas were all forests. But what happened to them? We cleared them down, we destroyed them, and in so doing, we destroyed so many habitats where organisms were living and living comfortably. It means we took them out of their comfort zone. And when we do that, what happens to these organisms? They are exposed to an environment with which they can't cope anymore, and they will then die. And when they die in vast numbers, they could even get extinct, and that will reduce biodiversity. Okay. Biodiversity also could be reduced as a result of natural disasters, such as volcanic eruptions, for example, such as flooding, for example, such as cyclones, for example, earthquakes. Okay, all of these can reduce biodiversity and destroy or damage the natural environment. Again, another threat is overexploitation of, say, fish, for example. Fishermen who fish without knowing exactly when to stop, they overexploit that environment, and they could render the environment to a level where biodiversity gets lost or even damage that environment. Overexploitation of wood, for example, of timber, because we want to make furniture, we cut down so many forests, we overexploit it, rendering it barren and prone to desertification. Okay. Again, pollution, because of all the toxic substances that we emit in the environment, be it in soil, water, or air, we pollute. And this kills a large number of organisms which cannot cope with the level of toxicity. Fish could die in water and go extinct, and the environment itself will be damaged. The use of pesticides could cause such pollution. The use of fertilizers as well could cause such pollution, either soil pollution, or even if it leaks into a body of water, it could cause eutrophication, like we did in another chapter. Okay. Other threats of biodiversity could be as a result of climate change, whether it came in naturally or artificially or man-made. Climate change changes the environment around where the organisms could have been existing and being able to cope with and feel comfortable. So when that environment is changed, then organisms will be faced with harsh environments, which could lead to possible death and loss of biodiversity. It's either caused through global warming by the emission of greenhouse gases by humans through the burning of fossil fuels and plant material, or it's caused as a movement like we saw with the movement of plate tectonics, okay? When continents drifted apart, right? Such that some part of continent move from the equatorial region to the hemispheres, the northern and southern hemispheres, exposing these organisms to extreme cold temperatures opposite to what they had when they were in the temperate zones around the equators. And alien invasion, for example, alien plants. Alien plants doesn't mean plants that come from space, because for us, everything that is alien is maybe from planet Mars or Jupiter. Doesn't mean they come from space. It means plants that are just found somewhere in an environment or in a habitat where they are not indigenous. So we have indigenous plants which have been successful in a particular habitat for several generations, and we now have these alien plants which enter a particular environment uninvited or were not present there for previous generations. They are now aliens. They are like foreigners in that environment, okay, or they are foreign in that environment. Now, what does it cost to the environment? What does it cost to nurse, say, alien plants in that environment? Alien plants use up too much natural resources. They don't have much control on how much natural resources they could have, because they don't feel very comfortable in their new environment. Hence, they tend to struggle to survive. In so doing, they'll consume a lot of natural resources. It's like if someone comes, say, in South Africa for the first time, let's say tourist, and I'd say to the tourist, you go and buy some clothes, and I tell you who has been in South Africa for long, an indigene of South Africa, I send both of you, you and the tourist, as the indigene and the tourist, as give them 500 and I say, go and buy clothes. And let me see who brings more clothes. Who do you think will bring more clothes? Obviously not the tourist. The indigene, the South African indigene, will be the one to bring more clothes because he knows the country better than the tourist. Because while the tourist will go to, say, Woolworths and buy just a pair of socks for 500 rand and come back with it and say, take, this is what I found. The South African indigene will come back with a huge number of clothes for just 500 rand because he knows places like Marabastad and all those nice places where you find the best quality cheap stuff. Okay, so that's to say, indigenous organisms know how to manage resources. They use resources in a very controlled and sustainable manner. Meanwhile, alien organisms can't cope because they're struggling. They've not understood how their environment operates and how they can get things done in a better way. Since they don't understand that, they will always tend to use up too much resources. For example, an alien plant will use too much water, too much nutrients, and if there's an indigenous plant growing next to that alien plant, the alien plant will be taking up too much so that the indigenous plant will not be able to have enough to survive, will not have the minimum to survive on, and it will die. So if there are many alien plants invading a particular habitat, they will be using up too much such that the indigenous plants will be dying and could go extinct, and this would lead to a loss of biodiversity. Okay. Now, on the other hand, disease kills if not treated or if not well managed. So it could lead to a loss of biodiversity, especially if a species experiences a particular disease which affects mostly that species and to which they are very, very vulnerable. It's possible they could get extinct, and that will lead to a loss of biodiversity. Just like we previously had ecotourism, now we will also be having fossil tourism. With ecotourism, the tourists were interested in viewing the environment, the natural environment, and appreciating it and loving it, okay, and having fun just exploring it. But with fossil tourism, which is another type of ecotourism because fossils are part also of the environment, in this case, the tourism is about fossils, because in fossil tourism, fossils are the main attraction. So these tourists move around just to view fossils around the world. In South Africa, the most famous fossil site is the Cradle of Humankind, which is found in Gauteng province and in Northwest province. Okay, the Cradle of Humankind is found in the Sterkfontein caves, the Swartkrans, the Kromdraai regions, and it is a World Heritage Site. It has been declared so since 1999. It is the richest source of fossils of hominids. Hominids are the early humans. Okay, and about half or nearly half of all human ancestral fossils were found at the Cradle of Humankind. That's why it is so important, because it is like a cradle, like where humans originated. We see where we actually come from, what we were like before, the kind of lifestyles that we had. Another fossil site is the West Coast Fossil Park. It is found in Western Cape, hence we have that name, the West Coast. It's found in Western Cape province and found along the West Coast, a few kilometers inland of the Lunchband Lagoon. Previously, it was a phosphate mine. It means it was used for mining phosphates. Okay, but it was then discovered to have a lot of fossils, and it was then converted to a fossil site. It has the greatest diversity of fossils that have been found around the world. It has about 5 million old species or 5 million old fossils. It contains the fossils of the first bear that were ever found in sub-Saharan countries or sub-Saharan regions that are below the Sahara Desert. And there was the discovery of the fossil of the extinct true seal. These are organisms that live mostly in marine areas. And also the finding of 4 extinct species of penguins. The fossils of 4 extinct species of penguins were found at that site as well. Okay, some fossils are left on site, meanwhile other fossils are left are transferred to museums or moved to museums so that they are well taken care of and they can also be displayed in a much beautiful manner. So important fossils have been moved to museums once they have been discovered. For example, the dinosaur fossil that was found in the Karoo region or the Karoo biome have been moved to the museum in Graf Reinet. The museum becomes important fossil sites to the tourists. Okay, so the tourists, after investigating all other fossil sites, they will also then decide to move to museums. The advantages of fossil tourism. Fossil tourism creates jobs, okay, because there are workers who will be there to manage the tourists and make them and actually guide them to the best sites or the best fossils, or explain what these fossils are, give some background information of their discoveries and what they stand for. So there's job creation that's available in that industry, and it generates income for the people living in the area. Income comes from the tourists themselves and all other accessory departments that are connected to this industry. Generates income for the people who are living in that area. All should be used for the people living in that area, because they come into view something that has to deal with their area. It's but normal that they should get some form of remuneration for that. It also creates business opportunities for travel agents and tour operators. When we were doing ecotourism, we saw how such industry also could be mismanaged, okay? How people could get exploited, and how the business opportunities that are created to generate income, the income could rather be transferred to other places and not actually serve their purpose on South African land or within the country itself. So we saw all of that. I'm not going to mention more of that here. All these points, actually, we also saw them under ecotourism. So that's the end of the fossil chapter. Thank you for attending.